let's start talking about compensation and what advice you have for us in terms of trying to secure positive ISS recommendations. And since we're going to be drafting proxies, what thoughts do you have for us?
Sure. I think the big trend here is, in some ways, the primacy of the proxy advisors. They are taking a first cut at comp. They're thinking about comp metrics. There's a lot of atmospherics that go into recommendations on comp and comp committee. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's this notion that we have to, if we need to make a compensation decision, we need to know what ISS and Glass Lewis think. And I think more important than that is you need to run your business. Paul and I are representing a company that's not currently on its best footing. And every time they make a comp decision, it is very important. They need the right people in the right positions at the right time. And not all of those decisions look good from a metrics or whatever metrics that ISS and Glass Lewis are running. They don't look great. But as I have advised them, as Paul has advised them, look, you got to run your company. That's your primary job, and you deal with ISS and Glass Lewis as they come. Sometimes that means gritting your teeth. Sometimes it means putting words in the proxy that are going to make your life easier. And to that point, one other thing I would mention is we talked about at the speakers dinner last night. When I first started in this job, the most important thing you could do on a proxy statement was an SEC form check. That meant, let's get the rules right. Let's address the SEC's concerns. Whatever the proxy rules are, let's make sure we're buttoned up on that front. We started combining that kind of form check with ISS, Glass Lewis, and let's take a look at your shareholder base and see if you've got BlackRock or State Street, somebody in there, because they have their own guidelines. And some of those guidelines have, and we used this word last night, required incantations or magic words that you can put in your proxy statement that are going to help you get a passing grade. And Chris will talk to this more in a minute. But I had what I think was an unfortunate conversation with, or an interaction with ISS about a year ago. We were dealing with them on an against recommendation, and we were speaking to an analyst. And we were describing a concept in our proxy statement, and the analyst said, oh, no, I Control-F'd your proxy statement, and that word isn't there. And it was kind of shocking because he didn't say, I read your proxy, or that I analyzed it, or he said, I Control-F'd it. And that was a little alarming. And Chris will talk in a minute about data scraping and things like that. But you have to go through, unfortunately, you need to go through those, all of the policies. And sometimes when you are describing the compensation that you are awarding, you need to do it on their terms. Did I tee it up for you, Chris?
I think you have pretty well. You're absolutely right about the incantations. It's a sarcastic term when I use it, but it's sort of meant to be sarcastic. If you can get your say on pay or your equity plan approved or disapproved based on which words you put in there, then it's absolutely worth the time putting the words in there. I will tell you that the ISS consultants don't know those words, but everybody who advises, from lawyers to proxy solicitors to us, know those words. The key thing is there is no... Everybody has this model that ISS is a single monolithic entity, and if you talk to this part or this part or this part, they all talk with one another and they agree, and it's not actually how it works at all. It's not a very... I was saying last night at dinner, 7 years ago I left ISS, and I was confident that in 5 years ISS would put itself out of business. It's been 5 years and a couple of years since then, but it's not that much longer because they're not really delivering value to their clients in the way that they did when they started it and nobody did research and there wasn't a lot of data available or anything like that. Now you could replicate ISS with somebody right out of a computer science degree and, I don't know, a couple of months, because all the data's out there on your websites, on the SEC site, everything else. Then you just have to decide, well, what's the best way to use this? If you're going to do compensation analysis, you wouldn't over-engineer it the way ISS and Glass Lewis have. You'd really look for, it's an expense. Did we get what we need from the expense in terms of return? And you'd think about how to work through that. Within ISS, what happens when you go definitive with your proxy, goes to Manila, and there's a data analyst at Manila who might be a very smart person, but what they're doing is pulling specific words and specific numbers, and if they don't find the number, or they don't, because of the way it's structured or labeled, they don't recognize that is the number, then they put nothing in there. They do this for compensation, but for your environmental score and everything else. Then it goes to a regular governance analyst or proxy analyst who writes up what the machine hasn't already written up based on those data points. And then sometimes, usually with S&P 500 companies, and then it goes a little bit further than that, or companies that really have issues, it goes to Rockville, and then the analyst that he's talking to gets the third crack at it. Nowhere in there is a really thoughtful, there's a process. It's not a really thoughtful process to say, does this make sense for this company at this point in its life cycle? A lot of it is, some of it's checking the box, and a lot of it is simply moving the sausage through the sausage-making machinery is fundamentally what they do. The analysts that you're looking at in Rockville there are a few of them who've been there for decades, but for the most part, they're hired out of an undergraduate degree, and they spend a few years doing it and they move on. And it doesn't mean that they're dumb people, but understanding how an income statement works, or why this might be the metric you really want to put in compensation, is not something they specialize in. So the thing.
Can I just interrupt 1 second? One of the things Chris said is the analysts, or wherever they sit, they may or may not recognize a number or a metric in your proxy statement. And I haven't done a systematic analysis, but as a person who frequently searches these filings, I'm seeing a lot more DEF-As being filed, and they are disagreeing with factual assertions that underlie ISS and Glass Lewis reports. And so what happens is a report comes out, it's based on certain premises that ISS or Glass Lewis has looked at. You the company, say, no, that's not right. It says so right here. And there's sometimes a difficulty interacting with the agency or whatever it is, and so you write a letter, you submit it to ISS, and you file it as a DEF-A. And so we're seeing more and more of those, not only on the policy side, but just basically on the kind of blocking and tackling the actual facts of the case, before stockholders. I'm sorry to interrupt.
If I could just say, I'm sorry, just to follow up. So the reason people do that is not because you're going to change ISS's mind, right? Once they've come out with their recommendation, unless it's just a massive error that changes everything, which happens, or you change something to get back under the guideline, those DEF-A 14As are not for ISS. It's so that you can go to the portfolio manager at one of your big institutions whose voting is aligned with ISS, so that he can take that into his compliance team and say, here's a reason that even though we follow ISS 99% of the time, this is a special situation. I'd like you to recommend to vote in favor, and here's something you could put in the file, so that if one of our clients comes and asks us why we supported ABC company when we followed ISS 90% of the time on this issue, he can pull this out. So that really is the reason. You're never going to change ISS's mind by power of persuasion once they're out. And I'm sorry.
The thing I was going to say about all this, although this sort of bears it out, is you probably feel like slitting your wrists at this point in the conversation. Because we all have war stories and horror stories, and some of them really are. The reason that you're seeing more of those filings is because they work, is the other thing that Paul didn't actually say. They don't work like they swing the whole vote and you get 100% support, but they're helpful to the people that actually have the economic consequences of the vote, which are the shareholders. The index funds, too, they may not feel it the same way, but certainly the active managers, they're required by the SEC, I think, to file a rationale for the vote. That's where this thing comes in, because ISS provides them one. If they're not using ISS, they have to do something else. Here's the thing, though, that'll keep you from slitting your wrists. You just need to find the North Star in all this. A couple of things about it. The proxy solicitors are not offering the value that they did 25 years ago when ISS was started, or 30 years ago, however long it's been. That value used to be that they could gather data that was really hard to gather. You couldn't scrape the web or the SEC. I don't know if Edgar was even around at that point. They would provide some analysis of it, but those early reports are like 2 or 3 pages long. Now, if they're not 25 pages long, somebody wasn't doing their job. Look at the proxy statements themselves, though. If you go back, let's say it's 35 years. Go back 35 years and look at one of your company's proxy statements on Edgar, and it is, it's a couple of pages put together. Now they're 200 or 300 pages. because they're required to be. I don't think anybody's putting extra pages in there just for the sheer hell of it, but it's hard to find stuff in there, and ISS is not doing such a good job of it. So every time that ISS, you may not love it when they recommend against you, but if they're recommending against something and you're filing one of these, it's actually an opportunity to cleave your shareholders off reliance on ISS, and Glass-Lewis, which is fundamentally what you want anyway. I go back to what I said earlier. You want them believing that this is the right board of directors to oversee the investment that I have and that I want a return on, because that's fundamentally what they all have in common. I don't think it's easy, but it provides an opportunity for you there. And frankly, the more times they see from you and other companies that ISS is not paying attention, not tending to its knitting, the more likely they are to trust well-intentioned boards that are obviously operating correctly to begin with. I will say your proxy should be, even if it is a triple back monster, it should be as clean and as helpful to people who are looking for data as possible. There were times when I was at ISS when I'd be reviewing something before it went out. It wasn't a proxy fight or anything. I remember one where they're recommending a withhold from a director because they couldn't tell if the director had attended 75% of the meetings. The disclosure was didn't attend one board meeting and 2 committee meetings, but they didn't say what was the total, so you couldn't do the math. You could, with another 10 minutes, back into it, and it was clear that person had, so we switched it before it went out. But ISS is not going to, there's sometimes in May where they're producing 500 reports in a day. They're not going to take the time for that. Like Flannery O'Connor said, for the deaf, you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large pictures. That's kind of what you need to do with the proxy. Not to belittle what it is that you do. There's a lot more to the proxy, but with the things that really matter, make sure your CD&A, you talk about the word accountability to shareholders and the other sorts of things, the responsiveness to shareholders. Get the words in there so when somebody Control F's it, they go to a paragraph they should actually read. Those are, I think ultimately ISS has to undo itself because it's just lost its sense of what it was about to begin with, and it's ventured into other things that are just not going to be remunerative, and it will crash under its own weight, but not just yet. While it's in the process of crashing, try to cleave your shareholders off of them by doing those kinds of things. And any chance you get to demonstrate to your shareholders that this is the right board for this company, proxy statement's only one of those, I think you use them.
One of the interesting things that came out of the speakers dinner last night was this notion of atmospherics in your proxy. And the idea, which I didn't really appreciate, that you should have a paragraph somewhere that's your greatest hits. And to Chris's point last night, if you've had a declassified board for 100 years, say it. Take credit for the things that that you've already done or that you've already implemented, things that ISS and Glass-Lewis like, and give yourself a little pat on the back somewhere in nice bold font, and that helps. It helps set the tone. It satisfies some of these data scraping requirements, and it's an easy fix, or an easy leg up, I guess. It's not a cure-all.